In the 1980s, Jamaica's economical and political landscape was in turmoil. This came with both fanfare and bloodshed, as the baton changed from the People's National Party to the Jamaica Labour Party. It was a decade of uncertainty, as many Jamaicans at the time had already migrated in fear of a socialist movement from the previous administration. As uncertain as the economic landscape was, so was the love life of Linton Berry, a young, married 35-year-old district constable in the Jamaica Constabulary Force, whom by his own conviction believed that his extramarital affair with Paulette Ziadie was the love of his life. Linton was the only son for his parents of 2 children, and as a child was well loved by his maternal grandmother. She doted upon him, especially when she realized that he had inherited her piercing blue eyes. He attended some of the most prestigious schools in Kingston and had the privilege of even driving himself to school. Most students at the time in Jamaica could not afford to do so. Back in the 1970s, this was not common to see, and it only goes to show that his family was moderately well off. After finishing high school, Campion College to be exact, and later St. George's College, he went on to further studies in Florida to pursue aviation. Passing all areas with a few more credits to graduate, he eventually decided to start a wrecking service and alignment business on his return to Jamaica. His parents, ever supportive, gave him the financial help he needed to set up business. He would eventually set up other businesses as the years went by, such as supplying gaming machines across the island, a chain of ice cream parlors, as well as an international trading company. He was ambitious, he worked hard, and he played harder. One of his favorite sports at the time was drag racing, an illegal sport in those days, but nonetheless Linton accumulated many trophies along the way, and no one could dethrone him. He could be considered a Jamaican success story. Handsome, a beautiful wife, thriving businesses with 2 sons, of which one was from the Union. It's unclear as to when he actually joined the Jamaica Constabulary Force, but he was well known with the locals, as well as the who knows who in Jamaica. It is often said that nobody cheats more than a man in uniform, and those of the Jamaica Constabulary Force are no exception. Maybe it's the stress of the job, or maybe it's the individual. Or Linton was fighting a demon that was unresolved. He met Paulette in the late 80s, a beautiful woman of Indian descent, petite in stature and of fair complexion, beautiful in all the areas that caught Linton's eyes. She was his weakness, and Linton could not get enough of her. They played house for some time, as Linton had other obligations like a wife and a son of which she knew. He was charming, handsome, and a successful businessman, all the things that would entice a naive woman to get excited of the possibilities. For years, on and off, they would see each other, but of course there was one problem for Paulette. He was married. No woman wants to be number 2 forever, and when she suggested marriage, he turned her down. With her striking good looks, it was no problem for her to attract another businessman, a coffee farmer and former racehorse trainer by the name of James Ziadie, otherwise called Joseph, otherwise called Jimmy. I will use Joseph in reference to him, as it was the name frequently used in the tabloids and the trial at the time. He too was previously married, but his wife died. Paulette developed a relationship with him, and they actually lived together for 9 years. From all accounts, it was not a smooth relationship with Joseph, as she would complain to her sister and Linton about his physical and mental abuse. She constantly ran back and forth between the 2 men, grabbing at any leftover love she could get from either. One night at a club, Joseph was pleasantly surprised when Linton approached him to tell him that he's also with the woman that he had been living with for 9 years. It took both courage and a huge ego on Linton's side for what was to be the fight for a woman that they both wanted to possess. I can only imagine what Paulette had to endure when he came in that night to relate the story of a man that he had seen at the club several times, not knowing that they had the same love interest. It never got better after that revelation, and if things were rocky between the two, it was now a tsunami. She moved out shortly thereafter for 6 months, and Linton was more than happy to rescue her, setting her up in a nearby apartment that he paid the monthly rent for, buying her a car, and even a satellite dish, which was a thing back in the 80s. Paulette was still unsure as to whom she truly wanted, and when marriage was placed on the table by Joseph, she quickly accepted, as she thought of how she was bouncing between the two men. Both men were abusive towards her, but Linton was obsessed. Despite having a wife at home that belonged to only him, he wanted to go to war with another man who had her interest as well. Still unsure, still looking for love, and not knowing what she truly wanted for herself, Paulette did the unthinkable, accepting and getting married to Joseph while still living in the apartment that was fully paid for by Linton. The wedding was on December 10th, 1986. Linton was livid. Because of his social connections, Linton knew that the marriage had taken place. Whether he was in denial or just angry that she had gone ahead with her plans, he was not going to accept it. He constantly went by the home of her eldest sister, Daphne, calling on numerous occasions, insisting that she would have been privy to her whereabouts. Her sister was well familiar with his antics, even before Paulette got married. She recalled that on one occasion she had convened a meeting between the two to ask him to desist from abusing her sister. This at the time he confessed to hitting her and promised to do better. The two men would occasionally run into each other at their popular night spot, and although it was tense, Linton congratulated the newlyweds. He was in denial and furious that she would go ahead with the marriage without his consent. It was not love, it was obsession and sexual jealousy that had consumed him. He was angry that he had invested so much, angry that she didn't stay at the apartment that he paid for. He was angry that she chose to marry Joseph. Even after his congratulatory gesture, he would still make threats to Joseph and Paulette, confessing on one occasion to Joseph that he was still in love with Paulette. There was no indication that Paulette was still in a relationship with him after she became Mrs. Ziadie, but her actions must have led him to believe that there was still a chance. She was confused and insecure, with obvious signs of Stockholm Syndrome as we know it today. She ran to Linton when Joseph would become abusive towards her, and she ran from Joseph when Linton would do the same. It was like a revolving door, indefinitely torn between two lovers. When there were problems in her marriage, she would talk to Linton. In the past, it is alleged that Joseph would physically abuse her, and she would run into the arms of Linton, stroking his ego and satisfying his sexual appetite. Linton was there because Paulette never set strong boundaries. Every man knows that if you push hard enough and the queues are open, push harder. She never really closed that chapter with him when she got married, and it gave Linton a false hope of getting her back. His harassments and threats continued despite numerous pleas to stop. On January the 11th, 1987, everything came to a deadly end as Paulette was shot in the face minutes after meeting with Linton at the intersection of Barbican and Jackshill Road at around 10 p.m. Why was she there in the company of her supposedly ex as a married woman? Even if he asked her to meet him there, it would have been foolish to do so without first informing her husband. If a man shows you who he is, believe him the first time. In Paulette's case, it would have been both men. It is alleged that Linton's first call was to her husband of only 1 month to inform him that his wife was shot, and if he was present, he would have received the same fate too. He then called her sister and later the police, with whom he showed up with his lawyer. Linton's only defense: it was an accident. He stated that Paulette called to meet him at the gas station and told him that she was unhappy with her decision to marry Joseph. He said he, in turn, told her to make it up with her husband, but she later became erratic and held on to his gun, which she pulled from its holster. It was during this tussle that the gun went off for the first time, hitting her vehicle. During the trial, he explained that he physically placed her back inside her car and attempted to turn the ignition when he suddenly felt a jerk, realizing that the gun had shot her in the face. Linton Berry was eventually sentenced to death over the 11-day trial, but appealed his conviction and was allowed a retrial, of which he was found guilty again. This time, he was given a life sentence to be served at the Tower Street Adult Correctional Center. He was released on June 16, 2023, and died shortly thereafter in September of the same year. For more crime stories within Jamaica and the Jamaican diaspora, please subscribe, like, and share. This is Marsha. Thank you for watching more of what you love on Island Crimes.